Ambassador Krexaval stood before the massive viewport of the Galactic Council's central station, his four arms crossed behind his back. The view showed Earth, that blue-green jewel that had given the galaxy its most peculiar species. But something was wrong. The planet's night side showed no lights. The communication channels that usually buzzed with human chatter were silent. "How long has it been?" he asked his assistant, a small Yethran whose antennae twitched nervously. 72 standard hours since the last human transmission, Ambassador, the assistant replied. All attempts at contact have failed. Krexval's mandibles clicked in concern. Humans were never quiet. In the 200 years since they'd joined the galactic community, they'd been the noisiest, most active species anyone had encountered. They talked constantly, traded enthusiastically, and stuck their noses into everyone's business with an eagerness that both annoyed and charmed the older races. The Zafrani representative floated into the observation chamber, her gaseous form shifting colors of worry. "My people report the same from the human colony on Kepler 442b. Empty. All humans gone, but everything else intact." "Impossible," Krexval muttered. 12 billion humans don't just vanish. But they had. Every human outpost, every colony, every ship with human crew members, empty. Not destroyed, not damaged, just abandoned. Coffee cups still sat on desks, some still warm. Personal effects remained undisturbed. Ships drifted in space with their engines still running, their human crew simply absent. The investigation teams found something even stranger. In every human location, they discovered the same thing. A simple note that read, "We had to go. We're sorry. Please remember us kindly." The Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Representatives from over 3,000 civilizations gathered, their forms a riot of diversity. Crystalline beings, energy clouds, scaled reptilians, beings of pure thought housed in mechanical shells. But the 12 seats reserved for humanity sat empty. "Perhaps they evolved," suggested the Etherian delegate, whose species had long ago transcended physical form. Humans always pushed boundaries. Maybe they found a way to ascend to a higher plane. The warrior poet of the Kragan Empire laughed, a sound like grinding stone. "Humans? Those chaotic creatures could barely agree on what to have for lunch, let alone coordinate a species-wide evolution." But as days turned to weeks, the laughter died. The first signs of trouble appeared in the outer rim trading posts. Without human merchants, supply chains began to stutter. Humans had been everywhere, their ships carrying goods between species that refused to deal directly with each other. They'd been the universal middlemen, the ones who could talk to anyone, trade with everyone. The Vorthan Commerce Guild sent a priority message. Economic projections showing 40% decline in interstellar trade without human intermediaries, requesting immediate intervention. It was worse than that. On the border between the hegemony of Scales and the Silicon Collective, tensions flared. For 50 years, human diplomats had kept these two powers from war, their strange ability to find common ground between a race of militant reptiles and sentient machines preventing countless conflicts. Now, with no humans to mediate, old grievances resurfaced. In the medical district of Sigma Station, Dr. Yix, a six-limbed Penthari, stared at empty shelves. Human medical researchers had been working on a cure for the wasting, a disease affecting 12 species. They'd been close, so close. But now their laboratories stood empty, their research incomplete. "We never learned their techniques," Yix said to her colleague. "They tried to teach us, but human intuition, human pattern recognition, we couldn't replicate it. On Mining World Delta 7, the automated systems began to fail. Humans had maintained them, their unique ability to improvise and adapt, keeping the ancient machinery running. The builders, The race that created the machines had long since become too evolved to remember how their own technology worked. They'd relied on human engineers who could look at alien technology and somehow just understand it. The ambassador from the logic paradigm, a race of pure rational thought, presented data to the council. Human absence creating cascade failures across all sectors. Their functions were more integral than previously calculated. They were just a young race, protested the Ancient One of the Eternal Dynasty, barely out of their home system for 2 centuries. How could they be so essential? But the evidence mounted. Human teachers had been educating the young of 100 species, their gift for simplifying complex ideas making them the galaxy's favorite instructors. Human artists had been creating works that somehow spoke to every species, finding universal themes in the specific. Human soldiers had been the ones who fought not for conquest, but to protect others, earning them the nickname, the galaxy's guard dogs. Food shortages began on worlds that had relied on human agricultural advisors. Humans had looked at alien crops and figured out ways to increase yields that the native species had never considered. They saw solutions we couldn't, admitted the hive mind of Proxima Gardens. Their chaotic thinking patterns created innovations our ordered minds could not conceive. The real crisis came when the Void Hunters appeared at the galaxy's edge. For a century, human patrol ships had been the first line of defense against these extra-dimensional predators. Humans, with their irrational bravery and unpredictable tactics, had been the only ones who could effectively fight beings that existed partially outside normal space-time. "Where are the human defenders?" the distress calls asked. "The Void Hunters are advancing, and only humans knew how to stop them." Ambassador Krexaval found himself in Earth's empty cities, walking through abandoned streets. New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai, all silent. In Times Square, the screen still played advertisements for products no one would buy. In a small cafe in Paris, he found a half-eaten croissant and a note from the owner. "Had to close early today. Be back never. Sorry." The humor, even in leaving, was so perfectly human it made his heart ache. In the United Nations building, he found something different. A sealed room that opened to his ambassador's credentials. Inside, thousands of data drives and a larger note. "To whoever finds this, we're sorry. We never meant to become so important. We just wanted to help, to be part of something bigger. But we received a signal from beyond the galaxy's edge, from others like us who need our help. We couldn't ignore it. We've left you everything we could, our research, our methods, our knowledge. But we know it won't be enough. The thing about humans is, we never did things the logical way. We did them the human way. Take care of each other. Remember that different doesn't mean enemy. Find the connections between you. And please, don't let the coffee machines break. We worked so hard to get every species their perfect cup. With love and hope, humanity." Krexaval read the note 3 times. Around him, his team was already cataloging the data drives, finding partial cures, trade routes, diplomatic strategies, engineering fixes. But he knew it wouldn't be enough. How do you replace intuition? How do you replicate the human ability to look at an impossible situation and say, "Yeah, but what if we tried this crazy thing?" The first Galactic Council meeting after the discovery was chaos. Without human diplomats to smooth over differences, arguments erupted. The warrior species wanted to militarize. The peaceful races wanted to hide. The traders demanded economic controls. The philosophers called for patience. "We must learn to work together without them," Krexaval said, but even he heard the doubt in his voice. Reports came in daily. The Void Hunters had taken 3 systems. Trade was down 60%. 4 wars had broken out in former human-mediated zones. The wasting had spread to 2 more species. And in all the chaos, one truth became clear. Humans hadn't just been another species in the galaxy. They'd been the glue. Their gift hadn't been their technology or their strength or their intelligence. It had been their humanity itself, their empathy that let them understand others, their curiosity that drove them to help, their stubborn refusal to accept that different species couldn't get along. Standing in that empty UN building, surrounded by the echoes of a species that had chosen to answer a distant call for help, Krexval understood. The galaxy hadn't lost just another race. It had lost its heart. The data drives contained technical knowledge, but how could they contain the human spirit that made that knowledge work? How could they replicate the human who looked at a Vorthon, a being of living crystal, and a Cephalum, a creature of pure energy, and figured out how to make them friends? As he left Earth, for what he knew would be the last time, Krexval looked back at the blue marble hanging in space. Already, without human maintenance, some of the orbital stations were beginning to drift. In a few years, they'd fall. In a few decades, Earth would be just another abandoned world. But worse than that was the knowledge spreading through the galaxy like a cold wind. They'd never realized how much they needed humanity until humanity was gone. They'd treated humans like newcomers, like children playing at being a galactic species. But the children had been the ones keeping the family together. The last transmission from a human ship had been typically human. Captain Sarah Chen of the exploration vessel Curiosity had sent a message just before her ship vanished. Don't forget to water the plants in the embassy gardens, the Thorian roses especially. They get droopy. And tell Ambassador Krexval his daughter's paintings are beautiful, humanity out, personal to the end, caring about alien flowers and children's art, even while answering some cosmic call for help. That was humanity. And now the galaxy had to learn to survive without it. The first system fell to the Void Hunters a week later. Without human defenders and their inexplicable ability to outthink beings from outside normal space, the defensive lines crumbled. The economic recession deepened as species that had never learned to negotiate with each other struggled to maintain trade. In the empty human embassy on Centauri Station, a small plant, a Earth daisy that a human secretary had been growing, finally wilted and died. Such a small thing, but somehow it felt like the beginning of the end. The galaxy had lost more than a species. It had lost the ones who cared about daisies and alien children, who could find common ground between ancient enemies, who looked at the impossible and said, "Let's try anyway." And in the growing silence where human voices once filled the void with questions and laughter and terrible jokes and unexpected solutions, the galaxy began to understand the true cost of humanity's departure. They were gone, and they'd taken the future with them. The great library of Kalos had stood for 10,000 years, its crystalline spires reaching into the violet sky of the knowledge world. But now, for the first time in its history, sections of it were going dark. The human librarians who had maintained the cross-species translation systems were gone, and without them, the knowledge of 1,000 civilizations was becoming inaccessible to all but the species that had created it. Librarian Prime Sectar, an ancient being whose body was more machine than organic after centuries of life, wheeled through the darkening corridors. The humans had somehow created a universal translation protocol that didn't just convert words, but concepts, emotional contexts, even humor across species barriers. Now that system was failing, and with it, the foundation of galactic understanding. "Another section has gone dark," reported Junval, a younger librarian whose scales flickered with distress. "The Etherian philosophy texts are now incomprehensible to anyone but Etherians." Sectar's optical sensors dimmed in what other species would recognize as sorrow. The humans called it contextual empathy. They could understand not just what was said, but what was meant, what was felt. We took it for granted. Across the galaxy, on the fortress world of Grimhold, General Tarek of the warrior caste stood before his tactical displays. The Void Hunters had taken 17 systems now, their advance accelerating. The defensive strategies the humans had developed were there in the databases, but they were useless. "Execute maneuver Theta 7, he commanded, watching his fleet move into position. It was a human-designed strategy, supposed to work against beings that existed partially outside normal space. But his forces moved too predictably, too logically. The Void Hunters slipped through their formation like smoke through fingers. Another fleet lost, another system evacuated. His aide, a battle-scarred veteran of 100 campaigns, spoke the truth they all knew. The humans didn't win because of their strategies. They won because they were insane enough to make the strategies work. They do things no sane being would consider. Tarek remembered watching human pilots in action. They'd laugh while flying into certain death, sing songs during battle, make jokes in the face of horror. And somehow, that chaos, that refusal to accept the logical outcome, let them achieve the impossible. "We are too sane to save ourselves," Tarek admitted. On the paradise world of melody, the Grand Concert Hall fell silent. For 50 years, it had hosted the Galactic Symphony, a musical collaboration between species that had seemed impossible until human musicians figured out how to harmonize sounds that existed in different audio ranges, some even in frequencies other species couldn't hear. Maestro Zindar, whose species communicated through color and vibration, tried to conduct a rehearsal. But without the human musicians who had served as bridges between the different musical traditions, the symphony fell apart. The crystalline singers could not sync with the void whistlers. The percussion of the stone dancers clashed with the harmonics of the energy weavers. "They heard music in everything," Zindar pulsed in shades of deep blue sorrow. "A human once told me they could find rhythm in the heartbeat of a star, melody in the whisper of cosmic wind. We thought it was poetry. Now I think it was truth." The last performance of the Galactic Symphony ended not with applause, but with each species playing their own music, unable to find the connections the humans had woven between them. In the depths of space, Captain Vornash of the merchant vessel Silent Runner discovered another abandoned human ship. This one was different. A hospital ship, the UES Florence Nightingale. He'd answered its automated distress signal, hoping against hope to find humans aboard. Instead, he found empty medical bays and a tragedy in progress. The ship had been carrying patients of dozens of species, all suffering from the quantum plague that had broken out in the Nexus systems. The human medical staff had been treating them, using their uncanny ability to adapt treatments across species barriers. Now the patients lay dying, the treatment half finished. Vornash's own medical officer, a skilled Pentheri surgeon, examined the human notes. "I can't understand half of this. They were using intuitive leaps, making connections between disparate biological systems. It's like they could see patterns we're blind to. They saved who they could, but it wasn't many. As they left the human ship behind, Vornash couldn't help but think of all the medical emergencies across the galaxy that were now becoming death sentences. Humans had been the universal doctors, the ones who could look at any alien biology and figure out how to heal it. On Capital Station, the seat of the Galactic Council, the economic summit was a disaster. Without human economists who could understand both the hive-mind collectives and the radical individualist species, no one could agree on solutions to the deepening recession. The Vorthon representative displayed charts showing the cascade failure. Human corporations controlled only 7% of galactic wealth, but they facilitated 63% of all interspecies trade. They were the translators, the middlemen, the ones who could make deals between species that couldn't even perceive each other properly. A Cephalim banker, whose species existed as living energy, tried to explain a concept to a silicon-based life form whose entire culture was built on precise crystalline growth patterns. Without a human translator to bridge their fundamentally different ways of thinking, the conversation devolved into mutual incomprehension. The tragedy was that all the infrastructure remained. The trade routes were mapped, The communication networks functioned. The universal credit system still operated. But without humans to oil the gears with understanding and empathy, the great machine of galactic civilization ground slowly to a halt. In the artist quarters of New Byzantium, the galleries began to close. Human art had been bizarre by any standard. They made visual representations that somehow spoke to species that saw in different spectrums, sculptures that conveyed meaning to beings without solid form, music that touched species who felt sound as pain. Now their galleries stood empty, and with them went the shared cultural touchstones. Xi'an, a gaseous artist from the Nebula Collectives, hovered before the last human exhibition. They painted loneliness using colors I cannot see, yet I felt it. They sculpted joy from metal and stone, and it made my vapor dance. How? How did they speak to all of us? The answer was becoming clear across the galaxy. Humans hadn't just been another species. They'd been translators of existence itself. Their gift was seeing connections where none should exist, building bridges between incompatible worldviews, finding common ground in infinite diversity. The military situation worsened daily. The Void Hunters had developed new tactics, and without human strategists to counter them with equal unpredictability, the defensive lines crumbled. System after system fell, refugees flooding the core worlds. On Haven Station, a refugee processing center, Administrator Keklan faced an impossible situation. 3 species that were traditional enemies had arrived on the same transport. Without human mediators who could joke and cajole and find unexpected commonalities, violence erupted. The humans would have had them sharing meals by now, Keklan's assistant observed, watching security forces separate the fighting groups. Remember how they resolved the Crimson Dawn incident? They organized a cooking competition. Somehow, they turned a blood feud into a cultural exchange. But there were no humans now to perform such miracles of social engineering. The refugees were separated, tensions mounted, and what should have been a sanctuary became another point of conflict. The scientific community felt the loss acutely. At the Galactic Research Consortium, projects began failing one by one. Human scientists hadn't been the smartest or the most knowledgeable, but they'd been the connectors. They'd look at research from one species and see applications another species needed. They'd bring together teams that shouldn't have been able to work together. Dr. Ivan, a methane-breathing researcher from the Titan clusters, stood in an empty human laboratory. The whiteboard still bore equations, but more telling were the doodles in the margins, silly drawings that somehow illustrated complex concepts, jokes that made serious science feel approachable. They made science fun, Ivan admitted through his breathing apparatus. They'd celebrate failures as learning experiences, throw parties for minor breakthroughs. They created an atmosphere where discovery felt like play, not work. We've forgotten how to play. The deepest loss was felt in the schools. Human teachers had revolutionized education across the galaxy. They'd figured out how to teach mathematics to species that didn't understand numbers, how to explain poetry to beings of pure logic, how to make history relevant to creatures who experience time differently. In a classroom on Sigma Prime, Teacher Velok tried to maintain order among students from 6 different species. The human methods were all documented. The games, the stories, the hands-on experiments, but without the human enthusiasm, the ability to make any subject fascinating, the lessons fell flat. A young Kraling asked, "Why do we need to learn about other species?" Velok had the curriculum answer ready, but what she remembered was how her human colleague would have responded, with a story about friendship across species, a joke that somehow explained everything, a demonstration that made diversity not just acceptable, but wonderful. Because we must, was all she could manage. The class ended early, the students departing unconvinced and uninspired. Reports came in from the frontier worlds where humans had been helping primitive species develop. Without human guidance, some fell back into old conflicts. Others simply stopped progressing, lacking the gentle encouragement and persistent optimism humans had provided. On Kepler-7, the newly awakened, a species that had just achieved sentience when humans found them, sent a plaintive message to the Council. Where are the teachers? Where are the ones who showed us the stars were not gods but places we could go? Who will tell us stories now? Who will believe in us? There was no answer. The older species had never learned the human gift of nurturing potential, of seeing what others could become rather than just what they were. As the second month passed, the full scope of the catastrophe became clear. The Void Hunters controlled a tenth of the galaxy. Trade was down to emergency supplies only. 7 wars had broken out. The quantum plague had spread to 3 more sectors. Educational systems were failing. Art and culture had become segregated by species again. But perhaps the worst loss was hope. Humans had brought an irrational optimism to the galaxy. When everyone else saw impossible odds, humans saw a challenge. When others counseled caution, humans suggested trying anyway. They'd been the ones who'd say, "Yes, the physics say it's impossible, but what if we're wrong about the physics?" At an emergency council session, the representatives sat in their species groups, no longer mingling as they had when human diplomats encouraged informal mixing. The session accomplished nothing. Without human facilitators to guide discussion and find compromises, it devolved into arguments and accusations. "We must face facts," the logic paradigm representative stated. "Without humans, we are reverting to pre-contact isolation. The experiment in galactic unity has failed." It was what many were thinking, but none wanted to say. The great galactic civilization hadn't been built by the elder races with their millennia of wisdom. It had been held together by a young species that had barely figured out space travel, but had mastered something far more important: how to care about everyone. In his private chambers, Ambassador Krexval reviewed the final human transmissions, searching for clues, for hope, for anything. Most were routine: status reports, trade negotiations, personal messages, but one caught his attention: a video log from a human kindergarten teacher on a mixed-species colony. She was reading a story to children from 8 different species, somehow keeping all of them engaged despite their vastly different psychologies. At the end, a small Thraxian larvae asked, "Why did the hero save the villain?" The human teacher smiled. "Because that's what heroes do. They see the good in everyone, even villains. And sometimes, when you show someone kindness, they stop being a villain." "But what if they don't?" the larvae persisted. "Then you keep trying, because giving up on people is never the answer." The video ended. Krexval sat in the darkness, understanding finally what the galaxy had lost. Not just a species, but the ones who never gave up on anyone. The ones who saw potential villains and chose to see future friends. The ones who looked at a galaxy of differences and chose to see a community. Outside his window, another star system fell to the Void Hunters. The lights of civilization dimmed a little more, and in the silence where human voices once sang and laughed and asked impossible questions, the galaxy learned what it meant to be alone. The chamber was one of the oldest in the galaxy, carved from a single asteroid by the first ones before they transcended. Now it hosted the final council, perhaps the last gathering of galactic civilizations before the complete collapse. Only 100 species had sent representatives. The rest were too busy fighting for survival or had already retreated into isolation. Ambassador Krexval looked around the diminished gathering and felt the weight of failure. 6 months had passed since humanity vanished. Half the galaxy was dark. The Void Hunters owned the outer rim and pressed steadily inward. Trade existed only between neighboring systems. The great experiments in interspecies cooperation were memories. "We gather to discuss terms of dissolution," the Ancient One announced, its crystalline form dim with age and sorrow. The galactic community, founded 12 millennia ago, expanded to glory with humanity's arrival, has failed. No one objected. How could they? The evidence surrounded them. The great station itself showed signs of decay. Human maintenance teams had kept the ancient systems running with improvisation and determination. Now, entire sections were sealed off, life support failing, gravity fluctuating. The Etherian delegate manifested more solidly than usual, a sign of deep distress. My people have decided to complete our transcendence. Without human philosophers to bridge the gap between physical and non-physical understanding, we see no reason to maintain our connection to this plane. Others announced similar withdrawals. The hive minds would return to their core worlds and cease external communication. The Silicon Collective would enter hibernation. The warrior castes would focus on defending their own territories. One by one, the species that had formed a galactic community prepared to become islands again. Before we vote, Krexaval said, standing despite his exhaustion, I ask that we hear one final report. My team has discovered something in Earth's archives. A murmur ran through the chamber. Earth had been quarantined after extensive searching revealed no clues about humanity's departure. What could they have found now? We discovered it by accident, Krexval explained. A hidden server powered by geothermal energy still running. It contained personal logs from humans in their final days. Not official records, diary entries, video logs, messages they never sent. He activated the holographic display. A human face appeared, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and tired eyes. Personal log, Dr. Sarah Chen. Day, I don't know anymore. They say we're leaving tomorrow. Her voice cracked. I've spent 30 years building bridges between species. My daughter was born on Centauri Station. She's never even seen Earth. This isn't just our home anymore. It's our heart. But the signal, we can't ignore it. The image shifted. A young man in a military uniform, recording on a ship. They're out there, beyond the galactic edge, humans, or something that was human once. Trapped, calling for help. The message is old, maybe millions of years. They say they're dying, that they need us. He laughed bitterly. How can we explain to the galaxy that we're abandoning them to save strangers? But we're human. We can't know someone needs help and do nothing. It's not who we are. More logs played, teachers crying as they left their multi-species students. Doctors agonizing over abandoning patients. Traders closing deals they'd never complete. Artists leaving masterpieces unfinished. And through all of them, the same theme. They didn't want to go, but they couldn't ignore a call for help. A child appeared on screen, maybe 8 years old. I don't want to leave my friends. Zixi just learned to play hopscotch. Tavara and I were writing a story together. Mom says we have to help the lost humans, but aren't my friends important too? She held up a drawing, stick figures of various alien shapes holding hands. I made this for them, so they remember we didn't want to go. The chamber was silent. Even species without tear ducts found ways to express grief. The final log was from someone the chamber recognized, Admiral Jennifer Martinez, the human who had developed the defense strategies against the Void Hunters. To whoever finds this, she said, her uniform immaculate despite the stress evident in her features. We've done the calculations. We know what our leaving will mean. The economic collapse, the return of old conflicts, the Void Hunters advancing. We know. She paused, struggling with emotion. We've left everything we could. Strategies, technologies, methods. But we know it won't be enough. The human element can't be replaced. She looked directly at the camera. We're not the smartest species, not the strongest, not the oldest or wisest. But we're the species that can't walk past someone who needs help. It's our gift and our curse. The signal from beyond, it's humans who've been lost for eons, trapped in some kind of temporal anomaly. They're dying alone, So far from home. We can't leave them. We know you'll hate us for this, for choosing strangers over family. But here's the thing about humans. Everyone is family. Everyone deserves help. Even ancient humans lost in the dark, especially them. The galaxy will survive. You're all stronger than you know. You just need to remember what we tried to teach. Different doesn't mean enemy. Strange doesn't mean wrong. Every species has something beautiful to offer. You don't need humans to see that. You just need to choose to see it. Remember us not for how we left, but for how we tried to live, with curiosity, with kindness, with hope. And maybe when you've figured out how to stand together without us, when you've learned to see each other the way we saw you, as family, maybe then you'll understand why we had to go. This is Admiral Jennifer Martinez, speaking for all humanity. We're sorry. We love you. Goodbye. The recording ended. The chamber remained silent for a long moment. Then the warrior poet of Krogan spoke, his voice unusually soft. They left to save their own kind. Warriors would understand this, but they defined their kind as anyone who needed help. This is incomprehensible, and yet perfectly human, the Etherean added. As if the universe had been waiting for this moment of understanding, alarms began to wail. The Void Hunters had broken through the inner defenses. They were heading for the core worlds, including this station. Evacuate, someone screamed. All ships, prepare for emergency departure. But Krexaval didn't move. He stood at the display, watching the human child's drawing of different species holding hands. Such a simple image. Such an impossible dream. Ambassador, we must go. His aide pulled at him. No, Krexaval said quietly. I'm tired of running, of accepting the inevitable. He turned to the fleeing delegates. The humans wouldn't run. They'd stand and fight. Not because they could win, but because it's right. You'll die, the logic paradigm representative stated flatly. Yes, Krexaval agreed. But I'll die trying to protect others. I'll die being human. To his surprise, the warrior poet laughed, a sound like an avalanche. The old warrior understands. Better to die with meaning than live without purpose. He activated his weapons. I stand with you. One by one, others stopped fleeing. The Ethereans solidified completely, preparing for battle. The Silicon Collective's representative began calculating optimal defense strategies. Species that had been ready to abandon each other chose to stand together. They had no human coordinators to help them, no human pilots to fly impossible maneuvers, no human strategists to devise chaotic battle plans. But they had something else, the memory of what humans had tried to teach them. The Void Hunter fleet emerged from hyperspace, confident in victory. They had learned that without humans, the galaxy's defenses crumbled easily. They expected another rout. Instead, they found something unprecedented. 100 different species fighting not as separate fleets, but as one force. Clumsy, uncoordinated, often getting in each other's way, but unified in purpose. The battle was brief and brutal. The defenders were obliterated. But they took 3 Void Hunter dreadnoughts with them, more than had been destroyed in the past 6 months combined. And their sacrifice broadcast across the galaxy, recorded by automated systems. On 1,000 worlds, beings watched Ambassador Krexaval's final moments. He stood on the bridge of a borrowed warship, firing weapons he barely understood, laughing as the ship came apart around him. His last words, picked up by emergency transmitters, for humanity, for the galaxy they loved. The stand at the final council became legend within days. More importantly, it became inspiration. On Grimhold, General Tarek watched the footage and made a decision. No more orderly retreats. We fight like humans, with chaos and courage. On Haven Station, the 3 refugee species who had been fighting saw the broadcast. In silence, they watched ancient enemies die defending each other. The eldest of each group met in the central plaza. No words were exchanged, but they sat together, sharing rations, while their children began to play. The change wasn't immediate or universal. The galaxy was still dying, but something had shifted. On Kepler 7, the newly awakened sent a message to their neighbors. "We are afraid, but we will not hide. Come, let us face the dark together." The Galactic Symphony attempted one more performance. It was terrible, discordant, chaotic, each species struggling to understand the others. But they kept playing, and in the noise, moments of harmony emerged. Brief, fleeting, but real. In the ruins of the Great Library, Librarian Sektar made a decision. Instead of preserving knowledge in isolation, she opened all archives. Let every species learn from every other. Let knowledge be free. It's what the humans would have wanted. 3 more systems fell to the Void Hunters, but the 4th held. Barely, at great cost, but it held. The defenders had done something insane, something illogical, something utterly human. They had rammed their ships into the enemy, sacrificing themselves to save worlds they'd never seen. "We're learning," Dr. Yick said, working in a makeshift hospital treating dozens of species with improvised techniques. "We're learning to think like them, to see possibilities instead of limitations." The galaxy's death spiral slowed. Not stopped, not reversed, but slowed. And in that slowing, hope grew. Not the boundless optimism humans had carried, but a harder, earned hope. The hope of species choosing to stand together because they'd seen what happened when they stood apart. On Earth, in the empty United Nations building, the sealed room opened one more time. It recognized the bio-signature, not human, but carrying the ambassador credentials humanity had honored. The young Thraxian who entered was the student who had asked why heroes saved villains. Inside, she found one last message, marked, "To be opened when you no longer need us." With trembling appendages, she activated it. Admiral Martinez appeared again, but this recording was different. She was smiling. "If you're watching this, it means you've started to figure it out. You don't need humans. You never did. You just needed to believe you could work together. We were never the glue holding the galaxy together. We were just the species that believed it was possible." The call we're answering. It's dangerous. We might not come back. Probably won't. But that's okay. Because you're going to be amazing. All of you, together. Different species, different minds, different ways of being, but one family. When children leave home, parents cry. But they also feel proud. The galaxy was our home, and you were our family. And we are so proud of who you're becoming. Look after each other, be kind, ask impossible questions, try ridiculous solutions, make friends with your enemies, find beauty in strangeness. And sometimes, when the night is dark and the odds are impossible, do something human. Stand when you should run, help when you should hide. Hope when you should despair. The stars are calling us, and we have to go. But you have each other. And that's enough. That's everything. With all our love, humanity. The message ended. The young Thraxian emerged from the chamber to find a crowd gathered. Representatives from dozens of species who had come to Earth on a pilgrimage of sorts. She shared the message, and together they stood in the empty human city, understanding finally that the greatest gift humanity had given them wasn't their presence, but the belief that they could survive their absence. The galaxy was broken, the Void Hunters still advanced, economics still struggled, conflicts still erupted, but something fundamental had changed. In trying to be human, the galaxy's species had found something else, themselves, reflected in each other's eyes. They would never be what they were with humans, but they could be something new, something forged in loss but defined by choice. A galaxy that had learned the human secret, that connection matters more than difference, that hope matters more than odds, that trying matters more than succeeding. In the vast darkness between stars, where human ships once carried laughter and questions and impossible dreams, other voices began to fill the void, uncertain, struggling, but united by the memory of a species that had shown them what they could be. The humans were gone, racing toward an ancient signal, carrying their gift of compassion to others who needed it. They left behind a galaxy wounded but not broken, grieving but not defeated. And in that galaxy, in small acts of kindness between ancient enemies, in shared struggles against common threats, in the choice to stand together rather than fall alone, humanity's greatest lesson lived on. Everyone is family. Everyone deserves help. And sometimes, the most human thing you can do is believe in each other. The stars still called, but now the galaxy answered together.